7. The Death of Wild Bill. Gold had been discovered in the Black Hills by Horatio Ross, one of Custer's scouts, in July of 1874. This find was reported to the War Department by General Custer, but as the Black Hills were included in the Siouxland, for which negotiations were then in progress, the report of discovery was suppressed until June of 1875. But the news leaked out, and within 6 months of the discovery of gold, seekers were cradling the nuggets and dust in the streams of the Black Hills gulches. As the Black Hills was on the Siouxland, the Indians naturally resented the invasion. This, together with the government's efforts to transfer them to a reservation, was the chief cause of the Sioux Rebellion that resulted in the annihilation of General Custer and his entire command on Little Bighorn. Deadwood was an outlawed town in 1874. As the land belonged to the Indians, the government could not recognize it as a settlement. It was not recognized until June of 1877. But when Wild Bill arrived there, it was a free and easy place, everybody carrying a bag of gold nuggets as well as a brace of pistols. Don Pierce there was at the time, in a letter the writer dated October 18, 1925, he gives a minute description of the town and its people. Deadwood, he wrote, had only one narrow street, filled with stumps, boulders, lumber, and logs, with hundreds of men surging from saloon to saloon. So you had to get acquainted with the majority of them, and have a speaking acquaintance. Whenever a gunman came to the gulch, the word was passed along quickly, as it would be Ladies' Sewing Society. There was Johnny Bull, who killed Farmer Peels in Salt Lake, Bill Allen the gambler, Tom Hardwick, who, with his party of prospectors, had killed Indians across the Canada line, so that it took all the persuasive powers of James G. Blaine to keep the Canadian government from hanging them. The Indians had stolen the boys' horses, and that was what saved them. They killed 60 Indians and came back over the line with their stock, but this country had to surrender them. Joel Collins, the Texas cattleman, was a gunman, but he was killed after a big spring robbery of the Union Pacific Railroad in the fall of '77. There was Laughing Sam, another gunman, and Jim Levy, the top-notcher of them all, except Wild Bill. Jim was killed down in New Mexico by McGowan, whose claimed Jim had jumped. Tom McQueen got his afterward in Cheyenne. C.C. Clifton, one of Quantrill's old band in Missouri, was another bad hombre. He cashed them down in the Indian Territory. Boone May, in fact, all three May brothers, were quick on the draw. Deadwood was a wild hog. Duels and gunfights in the street, often one led to a duck fall flat in the ground and escape a shower of lead. Wild Bill and Charlie Utter, otherwise Colorado Charlie, made their way to Deadwood via Cheyenne, leaving the latter town on April 12th. Harry Young, the barkeep of Carl Mann Saloon, was furnished a picturesque description of Wild Bill's arrival at Deadwood. We have already seen that Young has been befriended by Wild Bill, and he was a resident of Hays City. About the middle of June, wrote Young, there arrived at Deadwood my old friend Wild Bill. Accompanying him was Charlie Utter, commonly known as Colorado Charlie. They were mounted, and some picturesque sight could not be imagined with Wild Bill on horseback. This character had never been north of Cheyenne before this. Many of the Deadwood known, and many of them only knew by reputation, particularly those who came from Montana. Among these Montana people were a good many of the men of note, and I mean by that gunmen, and the arrival of his character in town caused quite a commotion. They rode up to the saloon where I was working, both of them having known Charlemagne for a while, and being friends of Bill, well, naturally called on him first. They dismounted and walked into the saloon, great crowds following them, until the room was packed. Men cordially received them, and asked them to make a saloon their headquarters, which they agreed to do. This meant money to me, as Bill would be a great drawing card. After the excitement of Bill's arrival had subsided a little, Bill looked at me for a few minutes, and then said, "Kid, here you are again, like a bad penny, but I'm awful glad to see you." And turning to Carl Mann, he remarked, "I first met this kid in the Hays City, Kansas, and wherever I go he seems to precede me. But he's a good boy, and you can trust him. Take my word for that." It has frequently been stated that Bill went to the hills merely as a gambler and with no idea of prospecting for gold. That is not true. In the Deadwood telegram of November 13th, 1922, the writer finds Wild Bill sought to accumulate gold by manipulating the picture cards rather than by digging in the earth for it. Buell, however, makes the positive statement that Bill established himself in Deadwood to watch for an opportunity to make a profitable strike. He had located several claims. This would not indicate that his sole interest in Black Hills was a picture card to Deadwood, although when not otherwise occupied, it is pretty certain he spent his spare time playing his favorite game, poker. There are two letters written by Wild Bill at the time to his wife. One of these, dated July 19th, 1876, disproves the theory that he had no interest in these parts of the minor. Here follows a letter, and now in the possession of Gil Robertson, whose wife was Wild Bill's daughter-in-law, Emma, who is mentioned in the letter. My own darling wife, Agnes, I have but a few moments left before this letter starts. I never was as well in my life, but you would laugh to see me now. Just got in from prospecting. We'll go away again tomorrow. We'll write this again in the morning, but God knows when the letter will start. My friends will take this to Cheyenne if he lives. I don't expect to hear from you, but it is all the same. I know my Agnes and only live to love her. Never mind, pet, we will have a home yet. When we will be so happy. I am almost sure I will do well here. Man is hurrying me. Goodbye, dear wife. Love to Emma. J.B. Hickok. Had it not been for Bill's courage, he might have done very well with a tragic fate even earlier than he did. There were a number of Montana gunfighters in Deadwood at the time of his arrival. Bill was envied by these men, for it appears that his reputation was much the same as a prize fighter who has all the opponents down to defeat. He was a champion. Gunfighters of that time aspired to kill anyone their number from the mad superior record, and thus lay claim to the championship. One night in the Montana saloon, 6 gunfighters, envious of Bill's prowess, were encircling him, openly threatened that they would get rid of him. A friend of Bill's overheard this talk and reported it to him. Bill immediately put his revolvers in order, and going straight to the Montana saloon, he walked up to the crowd. I understand that you cheap would-be gunfighters from Montana have been making remarks about me, he said. I want you to understand, unless they are stopped, there will shortly be a number of cheap funerals in Deadwood. I have come to this town not to court notoriety, but to live in peace and do not propose to stand in your insults. Whereupon Bill ordered the 6 men to stand against the wall and deliver up their guns. This they did in a sheepish manner. Then they backed out of the saloon, and it was the last they heard of the Montana crowd aspiring to the championship. Wild Bill was now living in peace with everyone in Deadwood, as far as he had traveled from his former conflicts with the bad men of Hayes and Abilene. O.W. Coursey, the historian of the Black Hills, now resident of Mitchell, South Dakota, has made a searching investigation of those wild times. He learned that Bill had a premonition when he entered Deadwood Gulch that his end was near. When the party reached the top of the upland divide, Breakneck Hill, and looked over to the Deadwood Gulch for the first time, he said to Colorado Charlie Utter, I have a hunch that I'm going to have my last camp and will never leave this gulch alive. Quit dreaming, Charlie Utter. No, I'm not dreaming, replied Wild Bill. Something tells me that my time is up, but where it's coming from I do not know, as I cannot think of one living enemy who would wish to kill me. On the evening before he was killed, he was standing up, leaning against the jamb of the door into the building in which he was to be assassinated the next day, looking downcast. Bill, why are you looking so dumpy tonight? Tom Dozier asked him. Tom, I have a presentiment that my time is up, and I'm soon going to be killed, replied Bill. Oh, pooh, said Tom. Don't get to seeing things. They're all right. The letter written by Wild Bill to his wife on that same evening lends reality to his legend. Agnes, darling, if such we should never meet again, while firing my last shot, I will gently breathe the name of my wife, Agnes. Wishes, even for my enemies, I will make the plunge and try to swim to the other shore. J.B. Hickok. On the following afternoon, Wednesday, August 2nd, 1876, he was engaged in a poker game in a saloon owned by Carl Mann and Jerry Lewis. There was some diversity of opinion as to the name of the place, or of course he always says it was number 6. Harry Young, the bartender, says it was Hard Knocks, and says it was number 66. While Brown and Hillard and Black Hill Trails give it as number 10. Those sitting at the table beside Wild Bill were Charlie Mann, Charlie's Rich, and Captain Massey, the later a former Missouri River pilot. As the game progressed, the quartet were joking and laughing. For the first time known, Wild Bill was sitting with his back to a door, while he was facing the front door. The rear door was standing open. Charlie Rich had taken Bill's seat next to the wall, just to plague him and keep it. Though several times Bill asked Charlie to exchange places. Rich said afterwards that he was the cause of Bill's murder. Jack McCall, the assassin, entered the saloon in a careless manner, not giving the least hint of his cowardly purpose. He walked up to the bar at which Harry Young was officiating, and then sauntered around to a point a few yards behind Wild Bill, then swiftly drew his .45 caliber and fired. The bullet passed through Bill's head, issued beneath his right cheekbone, and bent its course, pierced Captain Massey's left arm. The time was 4:10 p.m. In this letter to the writer, Mr. Pierce gives several details that have not heretofore been revealed. Doc Pierce was the impromptu undertaker who took charge of the remains and looked after the details of the burial. Now, in regards to the position of Bill's body, writes Mr. Pierce, when they unlocked the door for me to get his body, he was lying on his side with his knees drawn up just as if he'd slid down off a stool. He had no chairs in those days, and his fingers were still crimped from holding the poker hand. Charlie Rich, who sat beside him, said he never saw a muscle move. Bill's hand read aces and eights, 2 pair, and since that day, aces and eights have been known as the dead man's hand in the western country. It seemed like fate. Bill was taken off. The murderer's big Colt .45 6-gun, every chamber loaded, and the cartridge that killed Bill was the only one that would fire. What would have been McCall's chances if he had snapped one of the other cartridges when he sneaked up and held the gun to Bill's head? He would now be known as number 37 in that file of Mr. Hitchcock. It had been stated that Bill occupied a cabin which stood in a little corpse near the spot where the Burlingame Depot now stands in the city of Deadwood. But Doc Pierce states that Bill was living in a tent, wagon cover stretching over a pole. Colorado Charlie Utter was a tent mate. It was to this tent that the body was taken by Doc Pierce in preparation for the burial. In a former statement he said, "When Bill was shot through the head, he bled out quickly. When he was laid out, he looked like a wax figure. I have seen many dead men on the field of battle in civil life, but Wild Bill was the prettiest corpse I ever have seen. His long mustache was attractive, even in death, and his long tapered fingers looked like marble." The following funeral notice was printed and distributed among the miners of the district. Funeral notice. Died in Deadwood's Black Hills, August 2nd, 1876, from the effects of a pistol shot. J.B. Hickok, Wild Bill, formerly Cheyenne, Wyoming. Funeral services will be held at Charlie Utter's camp on the Thursday afternoon, August 3rd, 1876, at 3:00 p.m. All are respectfully invited to attend. The body of Wild Bill was enclosed in a coffin made from rough boards. Mr. Pierce had deftly closed the wound on his cheek so that it was scarcely noticeable. Bill's countenance was one of perfect peace, while his long, beautiful light brown hair lay parted evenly across his forehead, and fell gracefully down his broad shoulders. According to an eyewitness, the expression of calm contentment crowned his features. His lips were slightly parted as if smiling from the last joke that had passed around the table when the fatal shot was fired. Colorado Charlie had placed beside him in the coffin the Sharp's rifle that Bill had carried for many years. The grave had been dug in Ingleside, then a romantic spot on the mountain slope. The clergyman read the funeral service, and on a large stump at the head of the grave was rudely carved the following inscription: "A brave man, the victim of an assassin, J.B. Hickok, Wild Bill, age 39, murdered by Jack McCall, August 2nd, 1876. Captain Jack Crawford, the poet scout and one of Bill's most intimate friends, commemorated his burial in verse. This poem is dedicated to Paul Charlie Utter. The Burial of Wild Bill. Under the sod in the prairie land, we have laid him down to rest, with many a tear from the sand, rough thorned, and the friends he loved the best. And many a heartfelt sigh was heard, over the sward was trod. Many an eye was filled with tears, as we covered him with the sod. Under the sod in the prairie land, we have laid your good and true. An honest heart and a noble scout has bade his last adieu. No more his silvery voice will sing, his spirit has gone to God. Round his faults let charity ring, while we cover him with the sod. Under the sod in the land of gold, we have laid the fearless Bill. We called him wild, yet a little child could bend his iron will. With a generous heart he freely gave, and the poorly clad unshod. Think of it, pards, of his noble traits, while you cover him with sod. Under the sod in Deadwood Gulch, you have lain his last remains. No more his manly form will hail the red man of the plains. And Charlie, may heaven bless you, who gave him a bully good scent. Bill was a friend to you, pard, and you were his last best friend. You buried him neath the old pine tree in that little world of ours, his trusty rifle by his side, his grave all strewn with flowers. His manly form and sweet repose, that lovely silken hair, I tell you, pard, it was a sight, that face so white and fair. The pallbearers were William Hillman, John Oyster, Charlie Rich, Jerry Lewis, Charles Young, and Tom Dozier. In a letter written by Wild Bill's sister Lydia in 1896, she gives a pathetic picture of the arrival of the news of her brother's death at Troy Grove, Illinois. I remember the day that paper came, she wrote, with the news of Bill's murder. Mother had been sufferer of inflammatory rheumatism for 2 years before that, and had not taken a step in 18 months. My sister was standing at the gate when a neighbor came by and brought the Chicago paper, giving an account of Bill's death. He handed it to my sister. She took it and saw the headlines, but did not read all of it. She folded it up and hurried into the house, hiding the paper in the kitchen behind a mirror on the shelf. Then composed herself, she went up where Mother was sitting. "Mother," she said, "I'm going over to the store a minute and we'll be right back." She put on her bonnet and ran to the little store about 200 yards away to tell another of my brothers. All came back to the house together. Then they entered the sitting room. There sat Mother, a newspaper lying by her side, slowly rocking back and forth, while the blood from a hemorrhage of her lungs dried in the front part of her dress. "I say, get the paper, Lydia," she said. "And when you did not bring it in, I went and got it." She never fully recovered from the blow. Died 2 years later, still mourning Bill's terrible death. Within 3 years, Deadwood had grown so rapidly that it was found necessary to remove the body of the old graveyard where Wild Bill lay. On August 3rd, 1879, Charlie Utter and Louis Stoneshaw, old friends of Bill's, arranged for the removal of the remains to Mount Morris Cemetery. Upon removing the coffin lid, they found that few changes had taken place in Bill's features. In short, Bill lay under 3 years as if he had been merely asleep. The same smile lingered on his lips, as if the sleeper was in a pleasant dream. An account of the exhumation of the remains was published in Deadwood Telegram of November 13th, 1922, in which it was stated that those who assisted the undertaker were astounded to find that some of the natural embalming process of the soil, accomplished by the water which had percolated into the coffin, the body of Wild Bill had been so well embalmed as to preserve even the outlines of his features, the lines of the manifold pleatings of the dress shirt which he wore. This preservation of the body gave rise to the report that it had been petrified, but Mr. McClintock states that from his examination he would call it an embalming rather than a petrification, by the deposition of chemicals in the tissues rather than the body. This lot and grave had been prepared by Chicago Charlie Utter, who had given the remains their second burial. A marble headstone was placed at the head of the grave, inscribed as follows: Wild Bill, J.B. Hickok, killed by the assassin Jack McCall, Deadwood City, Black Hills, August 2nd, 1876. Heart, we will meet again in the happy hunting grounds. Heart no more. 5. Paula to Charlie. See each other. So great had Wild Bill's fame become that in the 10 succeeding years visitors to Mount Moriah Cemetery had chipped off pieces of the headstone as souvenirs until little or nothing was left of it. Then a new headstone, a full-length statue, was arranged for it. It was decided that in order to save the tomb from desecration by vandals, it should be surrounded by a steel cage. This new monument and statue were erected in 1892. It was carved by James H. Roegan, a sculptor of New York, who was visiting that locality.